So just a brief introduction about the talk. This is part of the syntax error hackathon that we are going to hold tomorrow, which will be starting tomorrow. And we had two webinars planned. This is the first of them, and in this we'll mostly be looking at how we at SDS Labs like this game engine known as Godot has grown really popular in the recent years, and how we have been using it, and we'd like to share our experiences and how it is in general, how it feels to do game dev with Godot, and also some generic principles that we use in game development that we have learned through our experiences and reading blogs, YouTube videos, Reddit posts, and all. So we'll just be starting shortly. Okay, so let's begin with this session. So this presentation will be divided into two parts. First, we will be having a look over game engines and Godot in general, and then we'll have a look how like one can go about developing a game with Godot. Like just a generic example. In the end, it's all up to anyone who uses the engine. Like what are the ideologies they follow. Okay, so first of all, like how game dev is different from normal software development. Like it's a given that presence of normal software development cycle is like it is there. It has to be. It is something that has been like really developed upon on the years, and it's something that almost all the fields of software development follow. And yep, all software development principles are valid. The things that we study in our courses, the principles like reusability, refactoring code so that it makes more sense, and cleaning up stuff, writing proper documentation, all those are valid. But yes, the main difference that comes that a lot of focus is given to creativity of the idea and its implementation. Like software, like game development has, like in game development, designers play a very big role, artists play a very big role, story writers and like directors, like, and on the development side we have gameplay programmers, game engine programmers. Like it's a very big variety of people who come together to do something they all love. That's basically what makes game dev different. And yes, it goes that creative process becomes one of the most important phases of development, where mostly contains of how people ideate upon an idea, and like then think how to bring that idea, how to convert that idea to a code, creating various assets, various arts, conceptualizing a story, the basic design of a game, and like so on and so forth. It goes, it's a long way. So okay, what does it take to make a game? Let's just explore this question in detail. Okay, so name of this game, I guess like most of us would have
Angry
played
Bird.
this game at some point.
Angry Bird.
Yeah, it's Angry Birds. I'd request that people would simply type their answers in the message, so like we'll have less interruptions. Um, there'll be a couple more questions, I think. So yeah, and I will be having a Q&A session in the end. So yeah, people can unmute the mics and ask whatever they want to in the end. So yeah, we've played this game, like we have all played this game, Angry Birds. So let's just see how one would go, how the Angry Birds developer would have gone about making this game. So like we see, like let's look at the design of the birds. We have various birds. They represent various properties of the bird itself. Like the white bird, it's colored white and it's a bit fat. Like looks like it's like it lays an egg, so it somehow conceptualizes that. The yellow bird will look how it has like pointy eyes. It's triangle shaped. Looks like reminds us of lightning, and that's its main property, speed. The black bird is apparent. It is a bomb. Like clearly looks like a bomb. And the red bird is just a normal bird that just shouts, I guess. That's it. And then we have various design, like the artist went around making various pieces for the game. For example, these bricks, this wooden block kind of thing, These are some like stone bricks and stone blocks. And then they also went like around making the background, which gives us a feel of the game. Like there are plants and stuff. It just creates a good ambience for the game. And the ground we have, like obviously there's got to be ground. And yeah, so the artist plays a lot of a big role in creating these things. Let's go a bit ahead. So yeah, next comes game designer. Like who was the like these are the people who played the role of creating what the game would be about, what would be the functionalities that the game would offer. So we know that like someone would have thought that a white bird will just fly and then it will lay an egg. Okay, so who was the one who thought that? Like, though that's the role designers play. A scoring system, the high score system, that's also what a designer makes. And a big part, which is the level design, like how to design a level, like how have they played, like they would have put some thought process into it before placing the pigs at certain positions, placing the type of pigs, what properties the pigs have, why the level looks like this. And like it should obviously be challenging and satisfying for the user to complete this level. So they chose a relevant set of birds that would make it difficult. Like there'll be a proper learning curve. It could, I don't remember this if this level was difficult or not. So that's a part of that's something a game designer thinks, like how difficult it should be with time to complete a level. Okay. And next comes is gameplay programmer. So for example, here we see like there's this streak and there's this bird that curves around. So what, like this curving mechanic, who actually coded that? That's what the gameplay programmer does. Like if I don't know if like there was this collectible, this donut. It doesn't give anything, it just gives you a feeling of satisfaction that we have done something special. Like it does not give any, I don't remember if it gives any bonus points, but yeah, it's a sort of collectible you can collect and show that I have done the level the hard way. So this thing, this mechanic would have been coded by a gameplay programmer. The mechanics of birds, the levels, like the functionality, what does each block do, what are its properties, that have been turned into code by a gameplay programmer. And yep, last what comes, like the thing you saw running on, that would have been run on a game engine. And so like a bike runs on its engine, but similarly a game runs on a game engine. For example, there's a lot, what we can see in every game, a lot of functionalities can be reused. For example, there's gravity in each game. Like things generally fall down when they need to, things collide. There are various properties of collision. So we can see a lot of such things. Can be kind of like refactored out of a game and be put somewhere else so that everyone who wants to make a game can reuse these functionalities. So such functionalities are provided by a game engine. So yep, that's, I guess that's where also we have, like let's just once list the components that a game engine provides. These might not make sense to you right now, but we'll have a look at them. So it should make. So we have a lot of things like scene hierarchy. Scene hierarchy is like how would you, like it helps you designing in a level. Event manager is like we'll throw events as like let's do one thing. We'll come at this afterwards. We first of all go and explore some of them. Okay, so now, why did we choose Godot? Another question. So, Godot is a 2D and 3D cross-platform, free and open source game engine released under the MIT license. Okay, there's a lot of stuff I written here, but what does this mean for us? It's an open source software. The biggest thing it means that source code is available to all. And in general, people have observed that open source software have a great community support. Like you'll find Godot people very active on Twitter and Reddit, and you'll see a big growing community on YouTube. Like you'll easily be able to find tutorials for stuff you want to do, and people will be very willing to help you in the forums. And another thing we have, it's very small in size. Unreal Engine 4, which is a quite a famous game engine. Like if you guys like, you might not have heard it, so let me just tell you. Like PUBG and Fortnite both run on Unreal Engine. A lot of games run on Unity. Like a lot of 3D games. Like for example, currently there's this game Genshin Impact. It runs on Unity. So Unreal Engine 4 is 25 GB. Unity is 8.3 GB, and this is how small Godot comes out to be. One would say that if it's so small, perhaps it is not fit enough to make a game. But the thing is, like, there's this 80-20 rule we generally observe in a lot of things, that 80% of the functionalities like can be achieved by using 20% things of like of any application or any system. Similarly, that 8 to 80/20 rule applies very sharply on Unreal Engine and Unity, that there are a lot of niche functionalities that one would probably not be requiring when like just starting out game development, or they want to make some rather, let's say, not a straight away a triple A title. Like you're making your first game, you do not want to make a photorealistic scene. That in that cases you want to make a fun to play like learning game, Godot is clearly the is clearly the a great choice for you. And like the community agrees that Godot's 2D engine is very very better than Unreal Engine and Unity. Again, it's very very easy to learn for beginners. Like I will try through this talk, you'll be able to learn some of the functionalities. We'll not go into actual demo or coding. We'll mostly try to understand how you can simply use the engine so that you watch a tutorial or two and you'll be able to understand how to start using it. And another big thing is there's no licensing fee. Unity and Unreal both have licensing policies. For example, as far as I remember, Unity is like if you earn more than $100,000 an year. I guess it's somewhat along those lines. I don't remember the exact number. You'll have to pay a fee to Unity, a portion of your revenue to Unity. Similarly, it goes for Unreal Engine. But for Godot, it's completely free. Like the Godot's licensing is such that you can even say that I own the source code of Godot. That's the advantage of open source. Okay. Yeah. So now let's have a look. This is what Godot engine looks like. We have a lot of menu here, a lot of menus here. Let's just go over them shortly. So what we see on the live left is the scene hierarchy. We'll be looking at this in the upcoming slides. Here we have the file system, your project, whatever files you put into your project, whatever folders, you'll be able to explore them through here. On right, we'll have properties. These properties will again be explained in the scene hierarchy part. And in the center, we have a viewport. This viewport is where you'd actually place stuff. This is where you'd see, let's say you want to make a racing game, you want to put in a car. So you'll be putting it in here. And that car would be visible here. You can use these various arrows. These arrows are also called gizmos. You can click and drag them around to place things. You can rotate stuff, scale stuff, and like yeah, a lot of stuff it provides. And on the top, like we have a menu bar and stuff. Like here we have an option to switch between 2D and 3D modes. A scripting tab, we'll have a look at it again. And yeah, here's this thing which allows you to play your current level, and that will like just click the button and it will play a level, and like you can just just test stuff out how it works. Okay, scene hierarchy and the node system. Let's have a look. So right in front of you, you're able to see something that might resemble a car. We have a cuboid shaped thing and we have four cylinders. Yeah, one's not visible. We have four cylinders around it which can depict its wheel. So here's it will like how do we in real life, how do we observe a car? A car, like it's sort of a cuboid. The cuboid will move in front and the wheels will also move along with it. Yeah, that's what we want. Like let's say you are more wanting to like what will happen if these are five separate objects. We'll have to move each of them independently. So scene hierarchy is something that helps us to avoid that. In the left, if you'll see there's a spatial node, that's nothing, just a default. That's a default node that Godot adds. And we'll see there's a car underscore body something. There's some shape in front of it, and then there's this, it's written car underscore body. That car underscore body represents this cuboid. So, and then you can see there's a kind of a like let's say branch coming out of it and leading into wheel one, wheel two, wheel three, wheel four. So what does this mean? That all these wheels are children of the car body. And the best part about it is I'll move car body in front and wheel one, two, three, four will move along with it. See, so that's one thing, that's one big advantage Godot gives. I'll just show a small demo to everyone. Hmm. Yeah, just let me get this. Yeah, just let me get this out. Yeah, you'll be able to see the same scene here. And see, I'll drag this car body and the wheels will move along with it. So that's the advantage of the scene hierarchy. For it, I can parent, and like I can make stuff child of something. And so, like if I bring this wheel one out of car body and then I start moving it, you'll see that one wheel's just left there because it's not a child of it. So yeah, that somewhat summarizes the scene hierarchy. And what I meant by the node system is, for example, I want to add another qubit. What I can do, I'll just go right click, add child node. So everything you see here is called a node. And add child, I'll just go, let's say I want a box. I'll write box and I get the CSG box. So I'll just put in, and yep, I got another cube in here and I can just move it around and stuff. I can scale, like, yeah, you can see there's some just some basic operations. You can learn them many times. It's not such a big deal. So mostly we add stuff by right clicking, add child node, and just putting it in whatever we want. So I guess this should give a fair idea of the viewport. Let's just get back to the presentation. Yeah. So we see here that, yep, I'm just showing how we can right click and add a child node. And I search CSG box, and yep, we are able to insert things like that. For example, you can see CSG cylinder. CSG, what it means is just some shapes Godot provides for prototyping. You can use proper 3D models. That's not an issue. We'll have a look at how Godot deals with 3D models a bit later. And yeah, so first of all, let's this is something. This is a term most of us won't have heard of, rendering engine. So what it actually is, let's just see. Uh, let's just first of all look at this. Yeah. So what we have here, you're able to see a grid. Somewhat looks sort of like a graph paper, and this what we're able to see, like a triangle is drawn. So let's say you want to draw a triangle on the screen. How would you go about drawing it? You'll have three vertices of a triangle and you want to fill it with blue. So what the rendering engine will do, it will take this triangle and it will rasterize it. Rasterizing is the process where we convert something like a shape into, let's say, a set of squares. You're able to see blue squares. These represent pixels. So, in case people, like someone doesn't know, our screen is made up of pixels. When we hear something like 1920 x 1080 pixels, which we also call full HD, it means that my monitor has 1920 dots, like each 1920 dots in the horizontal direction, 1080 in the vertical direction, and each of them can light up with any color. So to represent a triangle, we'll take this shape and we will rasterize it into a set of squares, which will then color accordingly to show the triangle on screen. So this sort of work is handled by our rendering engine. So yeah, in the end, like all the stuff you see is mostly made up of triangles. All 3D models, all games that you might have played that contain 3D content, they're all made up of triangles, and just by manipulating these triangles, we're able to do stuff. Let's just have a look. So this is how a sample like 3D model file looks like. .obj is the format, and it's a very simple format. It contains stuff in plain text. For example, like here we have v, and then we have three integers. This just means that this is a vertex of a triangle. And later on, you can able to see that stuff changes around here. So yeah, later on we define like which vertices combine to make one triangle, and yeah, that's something which gets a bit advanced. But I guess you might have got the point that vertices make up triangles. So you're able to see a plane here. This plane is also made up of a lot of triangles. So this I've opened up in Paint 3D. It's just a default 3D viewer that comes up in Windows. So this like Paint 3D can show you stuff. So and let's just look. So this is how it looks when we enter it into Godot. So currently you'll see like it doesn't have any color because there's something called a material which is used to color 3D models, and we currently, yes, obviously we haven't put up a material onto this model. So yeah, it is currently uncolored, and this is the default color Godot shows. So we're able to see that we are able to insert any model into our into our project. It's like adding a model is as simple as dragging this plain.obj from here to this page and or in this region anywhere. Like it will automatically get added. Really, really simple. Okay, and rendering engines also give us some advanced capabilities. That is like there's something called shaders. So let's just try to understand what are shaders. So there are two types of shaders: vertex shaders and pixel shaders. For example, we have a triangle here, but I want to I want to animate this triangle. I want that with time this vertex like this I want this triangle to rotate with time. So what I can do, what I need to do in short, I need to manipulate the vertices of the triangle. So that's what a vertex shader does. It takes a vertex and it modifies it accordingly, according to whatever logic you want. And why can't we do this on simple code like in a normal programming language? The reason is like when you see a 3D model, it contains a like something like 100,000 triangles, and if you do it on a normal CPU, it will be very very slow. So we've all heard about this word called GPU or graphic card, which is like quite often bragged upon when someone tells about their rig and how they can play great games. So yeah, that's where these shaders are run. That's like specialized hardware for this specific task for carrying out intensive mathematical calculations. So that's what a vertex shader is. And let's just leave pixel shader for now since it gets a bit complex there. So here we are able to see a like a sample vertex shader. What you seen above is is it was earlier a simple rectangular sheet that was made up of lots and lots of triangles. Okay, so like the rectangle sheet wasn't like a big rectangle. I'll try to draw and show it to you how it might have looked like. Yeah. So, for example, this would have been the rectangle sheet. We took this sheet and we made it something like this. So, yeah. So you can like sort of see like if I take this sort of sheet and I modify its vertices somehow with some logic, I can turn this sheet into something wavy. So that's what you're able to see here. So what you're able to see that this sheet is wavy. So what the logic was used was like we simply took vertex dot y. That is the like oh yeah. So a vertex is located in the 3D space that we normally learn in vectors maths. Like x, it has an x, y, and z. As simple as that. So what we took is we took vertex dot y. We multiplied it with some amplitude into like sine of the vertex x into some frequency. You might have heard this equation like when you must have studied waves somewhere down your like in your school education. So what we took like we displaced the y according to its position in x and the y. So in the x and the z. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. So yeah, xz is the horizontal plane and y is the top direction. So yeah, we took like this is something like a sine omega t and a sine omega t again. But yeah, it's vertex dot x one way and vertex dot y z. So you must be able to visualize. It gives us a lot of like using shaders. You can make very strong visual effects. A lot of things that you play on in games, the effects that you see are mostly made out of shaders. People yeah. So it helps a lot in bringing like in fleshing out a game and bringing some juice into it. Next up, we have an animation and the physics engine. Okay. So yeah, first of all, before going here, let's discuss what the animation and physics engine are. For example, we play a game, the character on pressing W generally walks ahead. Let's talk in the context of 3D games. So like we earlier talked that how models are made up of triangles. So when a person walks ahead, they need to like the vertices need to be moved accordingly. For example, his hand has to move ahead. So yeah, such animations are generally not made in game engines and are rather made in 3D modeling software like Blender, Maya, like C4D, any out of that sorts. And like those animations are then imported into uh, into like any game engine. Like Godot also supports animations, and like those can be relevantly played. And physics engine, yeah, that's a big thing because physics is a very very integral part of any 3D game. You want stuff that goes up to generally come down unless it's some flying island or something, and you want stuff to collide, and on collision they need to show certain behavior. For example, if it's a bullet, like if it's a bullet is crashing with glass, you want the glass to some sort of like break away, play some animation on the glass breaking. For example, two balls hit each other, you want them to bounce away. So those kind of stuff, like the Newtonian physics we have studied earlier and we even study now, that's what physics engine handles. So yeah. So what you're able to see here is that same scene, and I've added a floor and a ball. Yeah, you must be able to say that there's a floor and there's a ball, and you'll be able to see that it looks a bit weird. Like it has a CSG mesh, which again, like just like CSG box and CSG sphere, it allows me to add any model into this. So I added a sphere model, and then I added something called a collision shape. So what a collision shape is now, let's just imagine again, let's take a character model. A character model is made up of something like I said, 100,000 vertices. Like those are okay for rendering, but physics is mostly done out on CPU. It's not very easy to do on the GPU. So we don't use the same shape for physics. Let me give you an example again here in Paint. For example, let's just assume I'm drawing a sphere. This is a very, very fine sphere. It contains a lots and lots and lots of triangles, so many that it almost appears like a sphere. But I cannot use this same shape for collision. So generally what is done is that someone will take something like this. This would be its collision shape. This sort of shape would be sent to the physics engine, that this object has this shape, and calculate physics accordingly. So that's what collision shapes help us to do. It helps us to define some other shape which will be used for the physics of that object. Yeah, and the ball is just a rigid body. It's like kind of get it, like rigid bodies are bodies that obey physics, and collision shapes are what give rigid body the shape which will be used in the physics engine. So, and we have a floor. Yep, the floor also has this is a default shape that Godot provides, so it already has a collider and stuff on. We'll just have a look at the animation. So you're able to see that on playing the scene, the ball drops and it goes down. Not sure about the frame rate you guys might be seeing, but I guess you must understand, like you might be able to understand like how the ball just falls down. So like very, very complex physics can even be handled by physics engines when done correctly. So yeah, that's a topic if someone wants they can delve further into. Next up, we have a scripting API. So we've all learned, I'm assuming we've all learned some programming language. We've used like something like C++, Python, Ruby, and any sorts of that. So first of all, let's just understand what's the difference between like a compiled language and an interpreted language. So what compiled languages do is you will write some code and you will throw it to the compiler. What the compiler will do, it will compile it. That is, it will turn into some sort of like language that the machine would understand, you'll not be able to understand. And that code generally runs directly on your machine, no issues. And what scripting languages do is you'll write a script, a plain text script, and there would be no compiler. There would be a rather an interpreter which would take that text file as an input, and it will start running it line by line. It will read the line, it will understand it, convert it into machine language, there on the go, execute it, and then go to the next line. So that's the basic difference. So Godot provides its own scripting API. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. We need to understand what is actually meant by the scripting API. So when you're writing a game, you need some complex mechanics that would be out of the scope of a game engine. Like it would not make sense to provide them by default. For example, you want that when user reaches the completion area of a level, you want them to teleport them to, let's say, a celebration room. So that can't really be done. You need to use some sort of programming to do that. You have to write some logic, some custom logic, and like the game would behave according to that logic. So for that, scripting API is used. So That's what an API is, application programming interface. So Godot scripting API, like Godot's programming language, uses GD script. It's a very, very simple language that is quite similar to Python, but is very fast, as it, like, by limiting functionalities of Python, they've got to run it very fast since games need some sort of efficiency. And and it's very, very easy to code in. I'll just show you some examples. And what the word API here signifies is that we're able to use the functionalities that the game engine provides in our own code to write some custom code that might use or update that functionalities. So let's see. Yeah, here's a small, very, very small script. Here's the CSG cylinder, which is a simple cylinder shape. What we have done here is we've written this extend CSG cylinder. That means that this is the type of node I'll be attaching the script on, and I've just declared a variable total time and underscore ready. These are two default functions, underscore ready and underscore process, that Godot provides. Underscore ready is like the logic you write on underscore ready will be run once when the game starts, or when this object is like brought into the game. Let's say you load another level. So yeah, whenever that level would be loaded, it would be running underscore ready of all the scripts present in the in the like yeah, in the scene. Yeah, so someone's asking, it's Python. It's not Python. Like, you see def here if it would be Python. And it's func, the keyword they use for declaring functions. And it's different from Python in the sense, like, it can be compiled as well. When you make a release build, it can properly compiled and it can like optimize quite well, as opposed to Python. Yeah, it's someone's saying it's like a constructor we have in Java already. Yeah, it's sort of like underscore ready is like a constructor, we could say. But yeah, please don't quote me literally on that. There might be some things that might turn out different. So underscore process delta. So underscore process is a function that is called every frame of a game. And here comes the point when we try to understand what does a frame mean. So we must have heard this word FPS, frames per second. A lot of people go on bragging how they get 300 FPS in CS:GO, and they're able to, like, they play like how it's a standard. Like, I have my friend telling me, he tells me that it's a standard for competitive matches that they need to have at least 300 FPS. Yeah, the reason for that, we'll also understand. Let's just, so what that FPS is, what one frame is, the game logic will run once, and you'd want, like, let's say it runs once in 1 second, and then you'd want to run it against the next second. So that, in that case, you'd be having 1 frame per second. But in general monitors, we like to have 60 frames per second, since that's very appealing to the eye. So every frame, the underscore process function is called, and it's supplied an argument called delta. Delta contains the time elapsed from the last frame. And so what would go on, like, let's try to imagine what the engine would do. The engine, let's say a frame starts, the engine would run some of its own functionalities. Then it would check what all are the underscore process functions we provided. It will run all of them. Then it will attempt to run some of its more own functionalities that need to be run, for example, like rendering and some, let's say, some physics changes. Now I don't exactly know if they run physics before our scripts or after, but I'm pretty sure they'll be running rendering afterwards or after our logic. So when this one cycle is completed, most what the engines will do, they'll run the next cycle just as the previous finishes. So that's how, like, games are able to report 300 FPS even though our monitors only support a 60 FPS connection. So in that case, yeah, a lot of frames are dropped. For example, for 60 FPS, only 1 in 5 frames will be displaying on your screen. But it won't matter, since to the, like, our human eye has an, like, FPS rate of about 16. So yeah, in the end, it does not even matter. But yeah, it does improve the gameplay experience and the fine amount of control you are able to experience while playing a game. So in this script, what we have done is we've taken the delta, we have a variable called total time that belongs to the script, and we are updating total time according to that. And what we are doing, self refers to the object this script is applied on. Dot translation dot x. Again, like, how, like, one question might arise, how did I write this, how did I get translation dot x? Then it's very, very easy. First times, like, I had an idea, I need something called transform translation, something like that. Yeah, so transform is generally a word that defines the position of an object in 3D. It's said to be the combination of translation, that is the displacement in X, Y, and Z. Rotation, that is the angles it has turned around various axes. So that gets a bit complex. So it's not the normal X, Y, Z axis you read about it generally. And scale, that is in X, Y, and Z directions. How much have I stretched or compressed my object, or yeah, mostly object, or whatever node I'm using. So I had an idea that it's something called translation. So I wrote self dot translation and it tries to autocomplete. So that helps a lot. Otherwise, it's just a couple of Google searches away. Or like I just search how to like translate object go dot. And yeah, you're able to see lots and lots of answers here. Like you can easily do whatever you want to, changing position, like a lot of ways to do stuff. So you just easily you can refer this, or you can even read the actual documentation, which is this it says docs.go.org. So yeah, this is how we go about learning stuff when we're not able to find videos and stuff. So they have like they provide their own tutorials. We're able to see properties here. So I'm able to find translation here. Yes, this is the one I need. So I'll write dot translation, and then I want to know what are the properties translation gives us. So it has a type of vector 3. Let's open it. And okay, we are able to see it gives X, Y, and Z. Yeah, so Y is of my concern since Y is the up direction. So that's how we sort of go about using stuff in Godot. So yeah, what we did, sine power total time to the power 2. So yeah, it will be sort of like it will be oscillating in the X direction, but with time its rate of oscillation will drastically increase. So let's just see that animation. So yeah. Okay, so that was it. So we were able to see like it's pretty easy to script stuff. For example, let's return to our initial problem on reaching. I want that on reaching our goal, we want to teleport the person to let's say celebration room. So instead of here, I'll just change self.translation equals to some value that I might be having for that celebration room. It might be located at somewhere like 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. Everything works as long as it appears good to the user and the game plays well. So yeah, I could make a room very, very far away and then says, or like I'll check if win, then I'll just teleport the user. It's pretty simple to do this way. Yeah, so like again, this one thing that people love about GD script is how easy it is, because like Unreal Engine provides a blueprint system and a C++ API. So and the C++ API gets a bit messy at times, and blueprints also like get messy because in that you have to code using graphical interfaces. Like I'll just try to show. Yeah, let's just leave it for now. And yeah, Unity provides a C sharp API. So at times people need to understand concepts of object oriented programming, since C sharp is very much like Java in the sense that it's very object oriented. So yeah, so at times you need to understand the principles of OOPS to be able to code in Unity. So yeah, it's not that difficult, but I'd say out of personal experience that Godot has been the easiest for me. Next we go for input manager. Okay, so till now, whatever we have seen, we are not able to get any user interaction into our game. And yeah, what's a game if the person cannot even interact with it? It's nothing but a video. So what does input manager actually do? Let's just try to understand. For example, I'm playing a game on my keyboard. I'm pressing keys. I want to detect and move my character accordingly. I want the character to press to shoot uh, when I press space, and I want the character to, let's say, shoot a heavy bullet, or let's say I want to shoot a cannon when I hold space. So you see, like there are sort of events we have to detect. For example, pressing W, holding W, pressing space, holding space. Similarly, mouse clicks, mouse direction, and then we have various other stuff like having support for controllers, various controllers, like we have the Xbox controller, we have the PS controller. On phone devices, we even need support for touch screen, for example, touching left, right, up, down, doing gestures. Detecting all that is all part of the input manager, and that's how it's supposed to handle that stuff. So the input manager, it's supposed to take in a user input and do stuff, like we are able to do our own stuff with it. So again, it's very, very simple and Godot, as I'm going always. So here's a script, let's try to understand what it does and see if it does the same thing. It's, yeah, I just edited the previous script. So we have the total time again. We have this new variable called enter pressed. So I'd be using it to detect if the user has pressed enter key. So let's see, again, the ready is empty, and underscore process delta, what we have done, if input, so this is how you check any input dot is key pressed, key underscore enter. These are again some constants that Go provides. You can simply type key underscore and then it will give you a lot of suggestions in the autocomplete, and use whichever suits you. So we do enter pressed is equal to true. Okay, so when we press enter, this variable go to true. And yeah, and if irrespective of this, if executes or not, we'll be doing this, that we'll be incrementing a total time. And when enter pressed will be false, that is initially it would be false. So what we'll be doing, we'll be changing the translation in like as the sign of total time star 3. So yeah, it will be oscillating in the y direction, but yeah, it would not be like the last time when we were doing, like the frequency will not change, the frequency will remain constant. And when we press enter, suddenly what should happen is like the object should start oscillating in the x direction. And one more thing, we could, if someone has the eye to notice it, like if the object is oscillating like this, if I press enter at this point, it will start oscillating here. So yeah, that's just a small nitpick. Let's have a look at the animation and see if it does that or not. Yeah. So it's oscillating in the y direction. I pressed enter and it started oscillating in the x direction. Just another look for those who missed. So this is how it goes. Okay. Yeah. Audio processing and playback. Just let me change my presentation since I need some audio for this. I hope the lights. Yeah, it's presenting. Okay. So for audio processing and playback, and then we go ahead to one of the more core components of a game that would always be present. We need to, we'll need audio effects, music files. We'll be having various effects. We'll be having the background music, battle musics, like various stuff. Like there's a lot of audio in a game. We need to produce that real feed. We need to give the user the feedback of what they're doing in the game. So yeah, audio is a big part. And like the files are like the audio is generally taken care by the artists and designers, and game engines provide some simple functionality so that a gameplay programmer can easily add that stuff in. So what you'll see that now what I've done is there'll be there's this audio stream player 3D. This is a new node. Again, I right clicked on CSG cylinder. Yeah, I could have done it outside as well, but okay, doesn't matter. What this will matter is that it will always go with CSG cylinder. So audio stream player 3D. And what I did,
Sorry to interrupt, Manas. Can you switch over to your Godot engine window?
code out engine window. Sure.
You're presenting the meet right now.
Oh, sorry. I'll just shift to it. Yeah, so sorry for that, and I'll just go around it once again. Ah, and now it's visible. Got it?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, so let's just again have a look. We have this CHG cylinder which we have earlier, the one which was dancing around. And what I did was I right clicked and added an audio stream player 3D. This node, what it does, it allows us to play audio and in 3D. What does that mean? I'll just explain it in a minute. So what I did, I went over to my file system, I dragged and dropped a music file here. You're able to see that the song City of the Dead is here. It's in the stream tab, and we have various stuff like attenuation model. It's hidden behind it, but it's written inverse. There, then we have various things we can configure. So the best part about the an audio stream player 3D node is what it will do. It will play audio, but it would not be like a simple song playing. It will take its own position, and it will try to get the camera's position. and then it will try to like simulate how it would feel if a camera, like you were sitting here and at relative to at this that distance music was playing. So yeah, it gives real immersion to like you're able to understand where the sound is coming from. Like that's why a lot of games recommend headphones so that you're able to really understand, especially in multiplayer games, where the sound is coming from, and able to judge where your, like, let's say enemies or teammates are. Hearing footsteps, gunshots, like those stuff really matter in competitive stuff, and yeah, it really help in the immersion. uh, so we have various stuff like attenuation model. Attenuation basically means how, like, sound is a wave, we all know. So when sound goes away, its amplitude falls. So model then attenuation model basically defines that how with distance the volume should fall or the amplitude should fall. There are various models like inverse, logarithmic, and yeah, there's none. And I guess you might be able to connect it if you have studied waves earlier. Like there are various models for various kinds of situations. So yeah, there are a lot of properties that are basically just they just tell what they are. They may, like, anyone who's has some experience with sound will be able to tell what these do, and anyone who doesn't will easily understand them after playing with them for a minute or two. So let's just see. I went back. Okay, so here's just a video. Now what I'll do, on pressing enter, instead of the object switching position, I'll just turn on the audio playback. I don't, let's just play it for now. Yeah, so I'm not sure how clear it was on the stream, but yeah, so if you listen closely, you'll be able to understand that the as the cylinder moves up and down, you'll be able to notice some subtle changes in the sound that's coming into your headphones. Oh, it's playing the video again. Uh, Next slide. I'll just switch the next slide manually. Okay. So, okay, this was all we had for game engines and Godot in general. So, yeah, I'd like to just summarize what all we just saw. Like we went through various parts like the rendering engine, the scene, like the scene view, the input manager, the audio playback we get, and like let's just have a look at what all we skipped earlier. Since now you guys have some sort of idea what a game engine provides, let's have a look. What There's something called an event manager. So what would an event, why is there, like, what is the need of events? um let's just take for example a situation. You, like, on winning the race, what you want to do is you want to print on the screen player xxx has won, and then you also want to throw some confetti. Okay, so how will you do that? You need one simple way is like something like you'd write a script. If player, if player crosses finish line, then you'd call two functions. One is like some object dot throw and throw confetti, and something like UI manager dot show win screen, and just pass. So this is a very simple example, but let's just assume if there's more stuff, you want to play some winning music along with it. You also want to update the scoreboard you have on let's say a remote server. So you'll see that this thing scales very quickly, and we'd be stuck with a lot of if conditions. And like also like we'd also want, like, there would be so much code, so we'll not be throwing all of it into its own script. We'll be wanting that the confetti script is present somewhere, like there will be an object for confetti, so it is present on the object, on that object. And we want, like, there would be a script controlling the audio, so you'd want to call one that script dot play winning music. You'd want to call a UI script that calls, like, display win screen. So it doesn't scale very well. So what we do is we use event manager for stuff like this. What an event is like, if someone has experience with JavaScript or something like basic web development, that's basically it. Mostly it's the same thing. What we do is, like, we just throw, and instead of doing all this if else stuff, we'll throw an event, something like in our script we'll write something along the lines like event manager dot throw event win. And what will happen? All these scripts will check on their own. Like if event manager dot event is something like win, and they'll write their own code. So it helps a lot in organizing stuff. You could simply throw an event one place and handle it whenever wherever you want. So it helps, like it reduces code maintainability, that you just throw an event there, and let's say later you want to add stuff, what you'll have to do, just add an event manager check. Makes stuff simple. And so that's what event manager for. Resources and asset import management. So what we saw at the bottom left in the Godot screen, this area, the file system area. So that's the place where we had our files. So these files are properly managed. When you update, Godot handles them. It imports them because like files comes in hundreds of lots of extensions. Like it would not make sense to write specific code for each of them. So Godot makes it serialize is a word for converting a data form into other. So it serializes the data into a format it itself can understand. So stuff like that comes in this category. We have user interface. Like obviously a game would need a UI, a beginning screen, something like welcome to the game, press enter to start, create new game, make new game, like stuff like that. That comes under the UI. Multi-threading. So we must have all written some code till now. So most of the code we have written runs in, like it has a straight flow. It will just run, like one line will execute after the other. But multi-threading helps us to execute multiple lines concurrently. For example, there's this function called do calculation, and I want to do it 8 times, and none of them depend on each other. So I can run the do calculation functions parallelly 8 times. That's what the cores on your CPU count for. Like having a 6-core CPU allows you to run at minimum six threads, that like six concurrent function calls, which are also called threads. You can even run more of them at times. So Godot does multi-threading in the background. It does it appropriately so that the user using the engine doesn't have like they don't need to have any knowledge of multi-threading, and it will automatically like optimize stuff so that our game runs well. And serialization of in-game in-engine data structures. This is something like helps in saving. For example, you want to save your world, so it will automatically do so. Like it will just save the state of all nodes into a file and then load it again. So yeah, that makes stuff easy, and you don't have to write your own save file format. So with this, let's just return back to where we were. Mm, yeah. Okay. So with this, I guess we would have gotten some idea of how game engines work in general in context of Godot. Now let's just have a look at how it would one would feel developing a game with Godot, and how what's one process someone could follow. Let's just have a look. So I'll be calling upon Meet and Angad Kamli to take over.
Okay then, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, Angad, you are audible.
I'll just share the screen. The screen's visible, right?
Yes.
So now we have a special announcement. So this is Outrun Chess. This is a game that we made during a hackathon. Just like so, this is a game that we have made during a hackathon, and we'd like you to watch the trailer for it. So we'll be putting the link in the chat. You can just go watch the video and then come back. Meet. You're sharing the
Yes.
screen.
I'm just putting the link. Just a moment.
So just watch the video and then come back. Then we'll discuss the game.
Angad, you can play the same video here.
Okay,
Let's say
cool.
so you'll get an idea of the. No, like in the PPT itself, it will play. Yeah, just
So yeah, I'll wait a minute so that everyone watches the video and comes back. Okay, then I hope everyone has come back from watching the video. So now we'll start from the basic, like how we went about making the game. So I have kept a list of the commits that we made, and I'll start from the first initial. Like we first made a prototype in 2D for this game, which was made during a hackathon. So most of like a major part of the game was made during a hackathon. So we'll first show the 2D version of the game. So this is like a very humble start for the game. Just one menu. We play the start button. It was like this 2D game just with this. I made this triangle in Illustrator and then put a box around it. Make this skeleton. Something as simple as that. Nothing much complicated. So for this, I'll show you the code for this. So what the player does is like this is the player script. This is the node.js. This is the main menu. And this is the test level that I made. The test level had a component wall, which is this. It had a static body. Static body is something that doesn't move and does a collision. So it won't move, but other physics-based bodies will collide with it. And this is a rigid body. A rigid body is something that we can apply forces to it and stuff like that. So there was this wall, this player, and the Android control. Android control was like for the phone. I'll show you the Android control. Like when playing on the phone, you have these two buttons. So when this button is pressed, it gives out a signal, and when this button is pressed, it gives out a signal. Okay. So all of that was there, and in player.gd, like how Manas showed you, the first we get the viewer size and everything like that. Then in process, like what we do is if it's left, we put the thrust on left. If it's right, we put the thrust on right. Then there's angular velocity and everything. And all of this is done in process. In physics process, we apply this. So this is called in delta thing. That was the basic thing. So now I'll show you the next prototype which we made in 3D. So after this, like we did all of the things that were done before also in 3D. So this was the next prototype that we made. As you can see, it is still very basic. With this, what we did was just move all the logic over to 3D, nothing special. There were still a lot of problems. Like if you see, the rotation is not fixed in one axis, so it's getting vertical and there's no way to make it horizontal again. So there were lots of problems in this version also. As you can see, then the change, like in GD now we have three options. Like we are just a dimension increase when we're moving it to 3D. There's nothing much changed here. Now let's go to the next. Slowly the game becomes much more complex.
Angad,
Yes.
can you show the slide once? It has a drawing of what was the initial idea. Like,
Yeah, sure. So, and this was the initial idea. We made this in Paint, and so we had decided like
so we thought of this mechanic that when the player comes near a wall, when he's just about to hit, he can face the opposite side, and that will give him boost. And so the player kind of has to drift along the walls to get a speed boost. So yeah, that was the initial mechanic we thought.
So now we'll show you, like, we added this model afterwards. So, oh no. Okay, so this was the next model that we made. Even here it is very basic, but at least now the camera was like moved a little and we could see some things. But still there were many problems in it. Now we made it 3D because like we wanted to give some style to the game, so we made it 3D. But still, as you can see, it's not dynamic, like it's moving, the camera is not looking so good. Until now, there isn't one change in the code, and as you can see, still there. So after this, we made the first test level. With this, like we had added some changes, more changes. Then we made the first level and switched the camera and everything. I think it can refresh.
Angal, I think you will have to play from the scene.
Yes, now it got refreshed. So now like we had made a login screen, join game, host game, everything like that. So it could be played in. Now as you can see, it's dynamically moving to the left and it like tilting and everything, which like gives a little much better effect than just rotating in the one axis.
And now, as you can see, the walls also make a little bit sense. Like um, it also feels like a race circuit, and the design of this level is such that you will have to drift along the curve to the boosts are not added yet, but it was thought such that you will have to drift around the curves to win due to the speed boost.
So there's that. With this, as you can see now, like we had levels, we had walls, models. The walls, like we had a straight wall, like a diagonal wall, and a circular wall. Like three models were there, and then assets were plain and stuff. And then actors like Android control, camera. So like now the complexity was also increasing. We were trying with trails and stuff like that. Now we'll show what happens when we add the trails and emissions. At this point, you can see the game looked much more stylistic. We had added emission to the wall so that it like feels a little science fiction type of. Yeah. As you can see between the walls, there's some kind of flickering. As you can see there's a kind of a flickering between the wall. Meet will explain what it is. It's called Z fitting.
Yeah, so while making the levels, it was done in a little bit haste. So it is that the two walls are overlapping and both have emissions. So the renderer cannot decide which one to choose. So a little bit of both is getting chosen, which is leading to the flickering. And now you can see the outer theme and the trails also on the plane. So yeah.
So now let's move on to the next commit. Fighting. So as you can see now, the camera also will put a little bit up, and the Z fighting is gone.
And yes, we have also added spawn points for all the 4 players, and the plane emission is also added when the player gets a boost. And yes, the Z fighting was fixed by moving the balls a little bit away from each other so that they do not overlap.
Also, there's a boost. Like if I glide near the walls, it gets a boost. So the logic for the boost was we added one more collision box outside the walls, and if we come in that collision box, the boost is activated.
But as you can see, this was not the. This leads to that the fastest way to solve the lap is just to keep moving along the walls, right? And pointing towards it. But we did not plan it that it will be this way. We want that the boost will be activated only when the player faces away from the wall, so that he will have to control his drift. Right now, he can just keep gliding along the wall by pointing just little bit towards the wall, as you can see.
So now
So
let's
yeah, we fix it later.
yes.
Hey, Amdad, can you show the collision walls we made for detecting if the plane is near?
Yeah, sure. So here are the
Yeah,
walls. Like this had a static body and the proximity collider. Proximity collider is also a static body, but it doesn't collide with the plane. It just detects the collision. Like the plane has a collision layer. Like I'll show you the plane's collision layer also, so that you.
collision layers are like for detecting different types of collisions. Like uh, for different types of collisions, you want to perform different operations, such as for the proximity collision, we just need to perform a boost and not actually collide. So collision layers can separate these collisions, and you can even show the level 1 screen on
Yes.
the whole level.
Yeah.
The
So the way
proximity
we did
collider.
this is like the player has a collision shape which is like very near to it. Like you can see this is the player's collision shape, and this is the collision shape that we use for detecting collisions with the outer wall. So like we'll show you a level. So like if you can see, this is the collision layer which is outside, which is used for boost, and the other collision layer with which the player actually collides, it's like stuck to the wall. So now let's move on to the next. So even now the camera wasn't like that impressive, like the camera movements and stuff like that. That also needed to be changed.
Now we use something called a spring arm in Godot for the smooth camera effect. Um, now you can see that the camera feels much more better while playing, and it is just a bit of um, linear interpolation between the player's position and it is the camera interpolates towards the player's position, on top of the player's position, like something like that.
Yes. Like instead of just setting the camera to be above the player all the time, we are linearly interpolating it. So there can be times the player is right little off center of the camera. That's what we did in this commit. After this, like we wanted some interaction between multiple players. Like this was made to be a multiplayer game. For that, we now added some missiles and stuff like that, which we will now see. So it gets stuck here. Why did it get stuck here?
I think we'll have to git reset.
Yeah, I'll have to take it. Yeah. So like some things get imported and like when we change the, it doesn't get refreshed unless we restart the software. I think this commit was in itself a buggy commit. So that's why you can see like it's giving an error. Yeah. So let's move on to the next commit. Yeah, so now the imports are also, so now you can see like we added some UI and stuff like that. And there's like drawing game, host game. We also added a how to play here. So now we had added this. Also there was size.
So yeah, at this point, I'd like to bring your attention a bit towards our design choices and why our colors and our color scheme and stuff. So there's this theme called Outrun or Retrowave or Vaporwave or Synthwave. There are lots of names for it. So yeah, the game's name even is a pun on the word Outrun. It's Outrun Chase. It somewhat signifies that it's a race. So the Outrun theme generally relies on very vibrant and bright colors, like which should be like it will be fully fleshed out till the end of the game. But yeah, currently you're able to notice how like the walls are feeling like they're emitting stuff. The plane is also very like it kind of looks like Tronish. So yeah, Tron was a movie like quite famous movie that was based on the Outrun theme. So yeah, so our design choices mostly reflect around that, and our trails are colors that are generally used in the Outrun theme. Our UI, which you were able to see earlier, like Angad, can you once show the UI?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, things like these may matter a lot when you make a game, like how you choose your stuff. Like you're able to see this image. This image was rendered in Blender to signify the outer theme. Like again, able to see how we show a glow here. So all these things work a lot when you're trying to attract the player. It shows that you have put some effort into the game, and like they'll be able to get into the theme and the feel of the game. Yeah, it shows like it's a bit fast paced. Like you need stuff to be fast. It's a race, like yeah, stuff like that. So even the fonts were chosen accordingly, right? What goes well with that theme. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, sure. Then like we added multiple levels, improved the UI a little, added a lobby.
I think we will show our level designs and then.
Yeah. The level design is on the slide or?
No, in the game.
So let's just first show the level design.
Yeah, so now you can see the boost stamps have been changed a bit. The image has been changed, and this is the first circuit. Now we have also added two new levels. And we also have a new game mode here, which is called the deathmatch mode, where the players just have to shoot each other instead of um, having a race with shooting. They can just shoot, and the person with the most points from shooting wins.
Yes. Now the green thing that you can see here, that's a GI prop that we have added. What the GI prop does is the lighting and all, like the mostly intensive lighting that's getting done, it just bakes it and keeps it so that when the game is being run, it gives better performance, because now you have just have to look up the lighting instead of actually processing the lighting at every step. So that's what the green thing is. It's called a GI prop. Like Godot has two options: GI prop and backlight maps. Backlight maps, Godot doesn't have a good support for, and GI prop it has a good support for. So that's that. So that was like, this was the final point at which we submitted the game for the game at the hackathon, and we won the second prize in the gaming category of the hackathon. But because we were pretty, like the game had come out pretty much good, we decided to continue the development on it, and now like we have raised a point which I will show you now.
Okay, so assuming that a lot of you are from first year, don't get intimidated. The hackathon was also long. It was
Yes.
a week-long hackathon, so we had our time.
So now this is like the final version of the game that we currently have with that. And you can see I added an icon. Also, now we'll show you the UI.
Now the game also has a dedicated server where you can host the game and play with your friends and stuff like that. Initially, it was completely P2P. Like you would have to have a public IP to play. But now we have a dedicated server, so everyone can play.
Yeah, so like it has a how to
Angad,
play.
I think you can share the Godot screen only so everyone can
Yes,
even hear the audio.
yes.
To aim for that, they can quickly go through the bottom part, the right part, and like to the top part. And like the second half of the lap is quite fast, so it leads to very fast-paced action here, where people can try to stun each other. Like if people are able to stun after someone catches a boost, so they are able to like really stop their progress and gain a lead on them. So things like such things are quite often kept in mind while creating level design, so that excitement is created in the game. So the next level you see in the right, which is called Fire Lily. So you must be see like it's very curvy, and there are lots of boosters down there. And you'd see that in the starting positions, which are marked by arrows, 4 arrows, they're tilted. So all of them are thrusted into the boosts, and those boosts are just there so that the players who cannot control, they'll be pushed into so-called petals of the flower we see here. So that's again to create excitement. You need a lot of control as the boosts are quite quick, and they'll push you into the petals. And once you're in the petal, there's no other option except to circle around it and come out. And a lot of times, what happens is like people enter circle the opposite way, and they'll instead get thrusted by the ramps in the opposite direction, and like it counts as a reverse lap. So yeah, so that this level gets really exciting in both death matches and death races. In death matches, mostly people speeding from one petal to another, like to maintain their speed and so that no one is able to catch them stuck at one place and get shot. While in death race, it becomes like one has to be very controlling and has to control themselves from one boost pad to other. Like mostly what they'll try to hit into a boost pad and try to hit the square in front of a boost pad. So that square you can see where like it's no point, no one can go inside it. So that square can be used to rebound off the ball and enter the next boost pad. So that's the best way to complete this level. But of course, the multiplayer aspect does not allow the players to do this easily, and it actually becomes like it requires skill to counter other people and like do the same at like and win the race at the same time. So yeah, that's it for Fire Lily. And last we got this the contemporary art, and you're able to see the lab starting points are in the that area with that highlighted area. So again, we have bootstraps in this beginning so that people are again thrusted into the front wall, and that really helps because the initial speed of the vehicle is slow. So we need something to make the race exciting. And the one of the most interesting features of this level is the zigzag we have in the bottom. Since no matter how fast anyone is, they will get stuck here unless they are very like they are at, let's say, something like a medium speed and are able to drift without hitting much of the walls. They're able to drift through the middle part. So, and then we even have a decision at the right area. You must be able to see a L shape there. So player has a decision either to go for the L shape or to go straight. So what happens is like in the L shape, there's more distance, but there's a reward for the user that we have two boost ramps there, and one is a yellow boost ramp and the other is a red boost ramp. Red boost ramp gives a big speed boost. So yeah, if they're able to aim through this boost ramp, they'll be able to gain a lead upon those who come straight. And the straight path is often like easier to hold up when someone hits you from behind. Like you are generally not able to enter the L. So yeah, and the top part is mostly people speeding through and getting to the top line. Now, one interesting thing this level shows us, like during deathmatch, we're able to reuse the same level to create another sort of excitement. That's the middle region. The middle region, because like it becomes another area for battle where people just circle around and try to hit each other. So at times we have two people fighting in the middle area and two people circling around in the main track. So yeah, that's place where that is being circled a lot of times. Two or three people just take turns circling through it, and the one who gets the shot first shoots and runs away. But and oftentimes what happens is after shooting, like people what they do, like they tend to shoot other people because like it's obviously fun to shoot your friends and like see them spinning around. So when we shoot them, a lot of time what happens is people turn around. So that creates more excitement in the game, that someone would turn to shoot around, they lose their speed, then the person who got shot, they themselves get a chance to take revenge. So things like these, like this excitement that has to be created, is an integral part of game design. And like it's something you once you start, you have an idea, you start making it, you have played some games, then like you'll start coming on naturally discussing with your friends, teammates and stuff, and you'll like it's a very fun, that it's the most fun part of making a game, where you are able to create something exciting, you think what could be better, and then you play it with your friends to test it. Yeah, like that's the spirit of game development, like, and that's what we try to show here through these levels. Okay, so yeah, and another important thing we talked about was like good software development practices. So during the hackathon, we had made the UI and deathmatch, and like the deathmatch mode was decided to be put in the game on the last day, and it was really easy. Like that's what you get when you reuse code and stuff and follow good development practices. Like obviously, we don't expect everyone to do that in a hackathon. It was a long one, so we had some time. So yeah, and generally you'd be just hacking your way through stuff and like make short, let's call them jugaad, to get your code running. So yeah, so we made let's say we made some couple of good jugaads and we got this thing set up in within a day. So yeah, that's some part you get from good software practices. Okay, now since like we have going on and on with the theory of how this game was made, let's just it's time for a gameplay demo. We'll just leave the link in the meet and we'll also stream here, but I guess we won't be having any volume. So yeah, for true experience, just go and watch the video. Meet, you can paste the link.
So it's a 10 minutes video. We just watch some parts of it and come back. We'll also show some parts of it. So we are basically showing it because now we have 4 players, so you can see the interaction between them. So like when 4 players come, Okay, so that was all that we had for the workshop. Now, just a quick announcement. Tomorrow we'll be having a talk for like the intro talk for the hackathon. The post for which we will be posting soon, and everyone has to attend the talk. After that, the hackathon will start.
So we are open for questions, and yeah, just on a quick note that we'll be releasing this game possibly within a month. Let's just hope. Yeah, so it should probably be released in a month, and we'll try to notify everyone on all platforms possible. Thank you, and we are open for questions. Yeah, anyone has some questions, they can unmute themselves and just ask. And anything goes, like about the game, about Godot, about the hackathon, like you want to make some game stuff, anything goes. So yeah, someone's asked in the comment section what you have to do in the hackathon. So yeah, more about that will be revealed in the intro talk. Yeah, so there's that. Or perhaps you could refer the post we have already put out there, pretty clear on what we have to do. If you have anything else, you can contact us on chat.sgslab.co or message us on Facebook. Why is it 2 day long? Well, that's how long generally hackathons are. They take a day or two. Yeah, that's the traditional format. And again, these questions are relevant to tomorrow's talk. So this last call for them, otherwise we're just ending the call. Which version did you submit? Okay, calmly. So the version you saw in the trailer, right? So that was submitted in it, and we also have an old demo link. We'll just put it up here. Meet if you can just get the old demo, we submitted in the hackathon.
Yes, I'll give you the outrun submission link on dev.
Yeah. What is the timing? Regarding tomorrow's workshops, they'll be released in our Facebook post, which will be out soon. And what would be the hackathon starting? Yeah, it would be starting right after the talk, somewhere in the evening. Like after class, there's no worries about that. Nothing before that. So yeah, Meet has put up a submission link, so if anyone's interested, they can check that out. And probably the GitHub link there won't be working, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so I assume everyone's done. So thank you everyone for attending our workshop, and we hope that we'll see some submissions making games, and it would be great if you'll see them in Godot, and we are always there to help you. So yeah, see you tomorrow, and bye from our side. Thank you.